The four words arrived without warning. No fleet movement preceded them. No diplomatic buildup, no escalating communiques, no series of increasingly stern warnings that the galaxy's various military powers could have tracked and prepared for. Just four words, transmitted simultaneously on every active communication frequency across the known galaxy at 600 hours Greenwich Mean Time on a Tuesday morning, broadcast from every human relay station, every human ship, every human installation from the inner colonies to the furthest outpost in the rim, all of them transmitting at the same moment with the precision of something that had been coordinated down to the millisecond. The four words were, "We are coming now." That was it. No context, no explanation, no list of grievances or demands or ultimatums, no military coordinates, no target designations, no clarification of who we referred to or what now meant on a practical timeline or which of the 17 active conflicts currently burning across the galaxy had finally crossed the line that humanity had apparently decided existed. Just four words. And the galaxy stopped. Not immediately. The stopping happened in stages, the way very large things always stop, with the outer edges still moving while the center had already gone still. But within 6 hours of the transmission, 3 separate ceasefire negotiations that had been stalled for months suddenly produced agreements. Within 9 hours, 2 fleet movements that had been in progress for weeks reversed course. Within 12 hours, the Sorathi hegemony recalled its entire forward strike group from the Mekith border, a military repositioning that analysts had been calling impossible without at least 30 days of logistical preparation. It took 30 days of preparation. The Sorathi had simply done it quietly, 2 weeks before they needed to, because they had been watching certain indicators, and the indicators had been telling them something, and they had decided that being ready to reverse course was worth the logistical cost. The indicators were the reason the four words worked. The four words did not work because humanity had transmitted them loudly. The galaxy was full of loud transmissions. Every major power in the known galaxy had at some point broadcast a version of "We are coming for you," and the record of those broadcasts was a long one, stretching back thousands of years, and the record of what had followed those broadcasts was mixed enough that loudness alone had long since lost its power to stop anything. The four words worked because of what was behind them. What was behind them had been accumulating for 11 years, quietly, in the specific way of things that are built to be seen only when they are finished. And what had been finished, 6 hours before the transmission, was the thing that made the four words mean what they meant. Commander Yusuf Adiz was the officer who sent the transmission. This was not because he was the highest-ranking officer involved, or because he had any special authority over the content of the message, but because he was the communications officer on the bridge of the UEDF flagship Absolute Horizon at the moment the order came down, and the order was execute, and executing a simultaneous galaxy-wide transmission was a communications officer's job. He pressed the key at exactly 600 hours and felt nothing dramatic, because the dramatic part was not the transmission. The transmission was just words. The dramatic part was what the words pointed at. "Transmission confirmed across all relay points," he said. General Amara Osai, standing at the tactical display with her hands clasped behind her back in the posture she used when she was completely focused, said, "Good. Now we wait." "How long?" asked Colonel Marcus Trent from the tactical station. "Not long," she said. She was right. It took 4 hours for the first response to arrive, and the first response was not from any of the 17 active conflict zones. It was from the Keth Assembly, which was not currently involved in any of the 17 conflicts, and which had therefore been watching the whole situation with the particular attention of a civilization that understood its own vulnerability. The Keth Assembly's message was 12 words long. It said, "We have been hoping someone would say this for 3 years." Osai read it and showed it to Trent without comment. The second response came from the Sorathi hegemony, 40 minutes later. It was longer, written in the formal diplomatic language that the hegemony used for communications they intended to be on the record. And what it said, reduced to its essential content, was that the hegemony had been aware of human fleet development activities for some time, and had concluded that a posture of engagement rather than confrontation was in the hegemony's long-term interest. It also said, in the careful language of a civilization that was not accustomed to admitting things directly, that the hegemony's forward strike group had been recalled from the Meekith border as of 2 hours ago. Trent looked at the timestamp on the recall. They pulled back 2 hours before our transmission. Yes, Osei said. They knew we were sending it. They knew something was coming. They didn't know the specific message. She looked at the recall timestamp again. They made a decision. Based on the indicators. Based on 11 years of indicators. She set down the message. They're not afraid of 4 words, Colonel. They're afraid of what 11 years of work looks like when it's finished. This was the thing that required explanation, and the explanation required going back 11 years, to a meeting in a room in Geneva that had contained 7 people, and produced a document that had been classified at a level above anything the public knew existed, and that had guided the construction of the thing that made the 4 words mean what they meant. The meeting had been convened by General Patricia Holloway, who was at that point the UEDF's chief strategic planner, and who had spent the previous 18 months watching the galaxy's conflict patterns with the attention of someone who recognized a trend, and was not comfortable with where the trend was going. The trend was this. The 17 active conflicts were not 17 separate events. They were 17 expressions of a single underlying dynamic, which was that the galaxy's major powers had reached a point of rough military parity with each other, and had concluded, individually, that the way to break the parity in their favor was to move before the others did. The result was overlapping aggression, conflicts that fed each other, a galaxy-wide instability that was accelerating rather than resolving. The 7 people in the room had spent 8 hours discussing the trend and its implications, and what, if anything, humanity could do about it that would make a difference rather than simply add another voice to the noise. What Holloway had proposed was not a military alliance, not a diplomatic initiative, not a peacekeeping force or a mediation framework or any of the other things that the existing institutions had already tried and found insufficient. What she proposed was a capability so clear and so unambiguous that its existence changed the calculation every major power in the galaxy was making about the cost of continued aggression. Not a threat, not a deterrent in the conventional sense, but a demonstrated ability to go anywhere in the galaxy, at any time, at a scale that made the arithmetic of continued conflict produce numbers that nobody on any side wanted to look at. The capability required 11 years to build. It required resources that the UEDF had spent those 11 years quietly redirecting from other programs, with the cover stories that large bureaucratic institutions are good at generating when the people running them are determined. It required advances in jump drive technology that had been achieved in years 3 and 7 and 9, and that had each, quietly, changed what was possible by increments that added up to something nobody outside the program had fully calculated. What had been finished, 6 hours before the transmission, was the final installation of the 4th-generation jump drive array on the last of the 140 ships that the program had produced. 140 ships with jump capability, 3 times that of anything else in the galaxy, capable of translating a full fleet from one end of the known galaxy to the other in a single coordinated jump, arriving not in sequence but simultaneously, at multiple coordinates, in the specific way that made the phrase "we are coming now" mean something that no other civilization in the galaxy could currently say. The 4 words were true. That was what made them work. "We are coming," Present tense, active, immediate. Now, not eventually, not when diplomatic options were exhausted, not after a period of escalating warnings. Now. The galaxy had heard bluffs before. It had developed, over thousands of years of civilizational interaction, a sophisticated ability to recognize bluffs and respond to them accordingly. The reason the four words were not a bluff, and the reason the civilizations that had been watching the indicators knew they were not a bluff, was that the indicators were specific and technical, and had been accumulating for 11 years in ways that bluffs did not accumulate. Jump drive component procurement, shipyard capacity allocations, power system testing, signatures that the right instruments in the right orbital positions had been detecting for 3 years, personnel movements that, individually, meant nothing and in aggregate, told a story to anyone patient enough to read it carefully. Several civilizations had been patient enough. Several had read it carefully. Several had reached conclusions that they had shared with no one, because sharing conclusions meant acknowledging what the conclusions implied, which was that humanity had spent 11 years building a capacity that changed the galactic balance in a specific direction, and acknowledging that publicly required deciding what to do about it. And none of the civilizations that had read the indicators carefully had concluded that what to do about it was anything that would go well for them. So they had watched, and waited, and positioned themselves carefully. And when the transmission came, they responded to it not with the surprise of civilizations encountering something new, but with the specific relief of civilizations that had been braced for something for a long time, and were now able to stop bracing and start responding. The Verath Collective's response came at the 6-hour mark, and it was the one that Osai had been waiting for. Not because the Verath were the most powerful civilization currently involved in the 17 conflicts, but because the Verath were the most directly aggressive, currently engaged in 2 of the 17 simultaneously, and their response would tell her the most about how the transmission was being read by the civilizations most invested in continuing what they were doing. The Verath response was not diplomatic language. It was not formal. It was a direct communication to the absolute horizon from the Verath High Command, and what it said was, "Define now." Osai read it and almost smiled. "They're asking for a timeline," Trent said. "They're asking if we're serious," Osai said. She moved to the communication station. "Put me through." The channel opened. "This is General Osai," she said. "To the Verath High Command. You asked us to define now. I'll define it. Now means that at the moment of this transmission, 140 UEDF vessels with 4th-generation jump capability are positioned and ready to translate to any coordinate in the known galaxy within 4 minutes of receiving an order to do so. Now means that the order to do so will be given if the current Verath offensive operations in the Keth border zone and the Marav system do not cease within the next 6 hours. Now means what it says." She paused. "I would also note that this channel is open, and that this conversation is being broadcast on the same frequencies as the original transmission, so every civilization in the galaxy is hearing this answer to your question at the same time you are. I wanted to make sure the definition was widely understood." She closed the channel. Trent stared at her. "You broadcast that?" "Yes. To everyone." "That's what open channel means, Colonel. The Verath are going to react," Osai said. "Yes. The question is how." She moved back to the tactical display. "A civilization that has been operating on the assumption that aggression is cheaper than restraint just heard, publicly, a specific and detailed definition of what now means. They have 2 choices. They can test the definition, which requires them to believe that 140 ships with 4th-generation jump drives are not where I said they are and cannot do what I said they can do. Or they can accept the definition and adjust their behavior accordingly. And if they choose to test it." Os looked at him with the calm of someone who had spent 11 years preparing for this morning and was completely comfortable with every possible outcome of it. "Then they stop testing it very quickly," she said, and we will have demonstrated something that will make the next 6 conversations significantly shorter. The next response from the Varath High Command arrived 47 minutes later. It was 8 words. It said, Keth border operations suspended pending further diplomatic discussion. Not ended, suspended. It was the language of a civilization that was not ready to say it had changed course but was ready to stop. Which was the same thing in practical terms, even if the words were different. Osai marked it on the tactical display and moved to the next active conflict. The Marav system situation was more complicated, because the conflict there involved 4 parties and the dynamics between them had been building for 6 years, and had accumulated the specific complexity of a situation that had gone on long enough that the original cause was less important than the various positions and histories that had developed around it. Os had a briefing on the Marav situation that was 40 pages long, and that she had read 3 times, and that had given her a clear picture of what was complicated and where the pressure points were. She called the 4 parties in sequence. She told each one the same thing. The conflict in the Marav system ends. The timeline is 48 hours. The framework for ending it is whatever the 4 of you can agree on in 48 hours, and I strongly recommend you spend those 48 hours agreeing rather than doing the calculation about whether the definition of now that I gave the Varath applies here too, because it does, and the calculation will not produce a number you want. She told them this on open channels, all 4 conversations, so that each party heard what she told the others. The first party called back in 2 hours with a proposed framework. The second and third parties called back within 30 minutes of each other with modifications to the framework. The fourth party, which had the most to lose from any resolution, and had therefore been the primary obstacle to the previous 6 years of failed negotiations, called back at the 41-hour mark with an acceptance of the modified framework, 7 hours before the deadline. Trent documented the Marav resolution on the tactical display. It was the 4th resolution in 36 hours. The others had come from the Sorathi border situation, the Keth assembly conflict, and the hegemony dispute in the outer territories. 4 down, he said, 13 to go. 12, Osai said. The Prathais situation resolved itself 20 minutes ago. Apparently the 2 parties came to an arrangement without us needing to be involved once they heard the Marav conversation. Trent looked at her. They sorted it out themselves. That's what I said. Because they heard the Marav conversation. Because they did the arithmetic and decided that sorting it out themselves was preferable to waiting for us to get to them on the list. She moved to the next entry on the display. Which is the point? This was the thing about the forewords that the galaxy was spending the next several weeks processing, and that the analysts and historians who wrote about this period would spend years examining. The forewords were not the power. The forewords were the announcement that the power existed. The actual power was the calculation it forced, repeated independently by every civilization currently invested in an active conflict. A calculation that came out the same way every time because the arithmetic was the arithmetic, and the arithmetic said that continuing what they were doing was now a decision with a cost that had not existed yesterday. Nobody wanted to pay the cost. The cost was not death or destruction in the immediate sense, not the ships burning in engagement, not the planetary strikes or the resource seizures, or the border pressures that the 17 active conflicts had been producing for months and years. The cost was something larger and less immediate, and therefore more frightening to the civilizations whose leaders thought in the timescales that leaders of old civilizations learned to think in. The cost was what it meant to have humanity arrive. Not for the battle. The battle was one thing, and it was a thing that the 4th generation jump drives and the 140 ships made clear enough. The cost was what came after the battle. What a civilization looked like when it had been the target of "we are coming now," and the now had been delivered and the battle was over. The historical record on that question was thin because the situation had not previously arisen, but the historical record on adjacent questions was not thin, and the adjacent questions produced answers that nobody wanted to be the first to test the direct version of. So they did the arithmetic, separately, quietly, in the councils and command centers of 17 conflicts. They did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic said stop, and they stopped, and the stopping was not all at once and not without the specific friction of civilizations that did not want to be seen stopping because someone had told them to. The friction produced the conversations that Osai spent the next 9 days having, one after another, on open channels, with the patient consistency of someone doing a job that had been years in the preparation and was going to take the time it took. The conversations were not all short. The hegemony border situation required 4 separate conversations before the framework was stable. The Dominion conflict required a direct meeting, which Osai conducted aboard the Absolute Horizon with the Dominion's senior diplomatic military representative, a careful being named Vareth Seal, who arrived prepared and left satisfied, and who said, at the end of the meeting, something that Osai thought about for a long time afterward. What Seal said was, "We have been waiting for something to change the arithmetic for a long time. It is easier to stop than people think when the arithmetic changes. The difficulty has always been that the arithmetic never changed." Osai thought about 11 years of quiet construction, about jump drive components and power system signatures and personnel movements, about a document classified above the level the public knew existed, about General Holloway in a room with 7 people in 8 hours, and a proposal that was not a threat or a deterrent or a peacekeeping force. A capability, just a capability, the clearest possible demonstration of what was true, delivered at the moment when it was true enough to deliver. She said to Seal, "The arithmetic changed because we changed it." Seal looked at her for a moment, then said, "Yes, that is what I mean." On the 16th day after the transmission, Trent updated the tactical display with the resolution of the 17th and final active conflict. It was the Prathai's outer zone situation, which had been the most intractable and had required 11 days of the patient conversations and 2 open-channel broadcasts, specifically addressed to the parties involved, and 1 direct meeting between Osai and the senior commanders of both sides, in which Osai had laid out the arithmetic with a clarity that left no room for the kind of ambiguity that intractable situations typically hid inside. Trent put the 17th resolution marker on the display and stood back and looked at it. 17 resolutions, 16 days. "General," he said. Osai was at the window of the bridge, looking out at the stars in the way she sometimes did when the work had reached a pause. She turned. He showed her the completed display. She looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "Get me the relay network. I need to send a follow-up transmission." Another broadcast. Short 1. He opened the relay network. She moved to the communication station. The follow-up transmission was 6 words. It went out on the same frequencies as the original, simultaneously, to every inhabited system in the known galaxy. It said, "The work begins now. Come talk." Trent read it. "That's the peace process." "That's the invitation to the peace process," Osai said. "The process itself is going to take considerably longer than 16 days. She moved back to the tactical display. "But it starts with someone deciding to have the conversation. 16 days ago, nobody was having the conversation because the arithmetic said conflict was cheaper than talking." She looked at the display. "We changed the arithmetic. Now we can have the conversation." "And you think they'll come?" She looked at him with the calm that had been there since the moment he had watched her press transmit on 4 words at 600 hours on a Tuesday morning. "Colonel," she said, "they're already responding." She was right. The first response to the 6-word follow-up arrived before she finished the sentence. Then another. Then 3 more in the next 10 minutes. Then the Sorathi hegemony and the Verath collective and the Keth assembly and the Dominion, one after another in the order of their calculation and their courage to act on it. They came, not all at once, not without friction, not in the clean, easy way of stories that left out the difficulty. They came the way things actually happen, imperfectly and unevenly, and with the specific human and not human messiness of real civilizations making real decisions under real constraints. But they came because the arithmetic had changed, because 4 words on a Tuesday morning had announced that something had been built, quietly, over 11 years, that made the cost of not coming more than any of them wanted to pay. Because sometimes the thing that stops 17 wars is not a weapon, and not a treaty, and not a long history of patient diplomacy, but the clean arithmetic of a capability that is real, and the 4 words that announce it. We are coming now. They had meant it. The galaxy had understood. And the work, the long, hard, real work that came after the stopping, had begun.